Hi, my name is K.Thomas, W1DED. When I got back into contesting a few months ago, I was looking through QRZ as well as the contest summaries, and there was a name and a call sign that kept coming up consistently, and that was Marty Sullaway, NN1C. He was doing a lot of single ops, a lot of multi-ops, and then I found out that he's pretty young compared to most of the people in this field. So I reached out to Marty and asked him if he'd have a conversation with me today about contesting in general, but also specifically the recent experience with the 10-meter contest, the ARRL 10-meter contest. Marty, thank you for joining me.
Great to be here.
So why don't we start with your background? When did you first become a ham, and what got you into the hobby?
Yeah, sure. So I've been licensed for coming up on 10 years, so I've been doing this thing for a little bit. It'll be 10 years this fall. I actually found ham radio on the internet one day, and the rest, as they say, is history. I don't come from a family of other hams or anything like that. It just seemed really interesting, and that was my first big expensive mistake.
Absolutely. Well, that is unusual. I think a lot of us have stories, like in my case, my dad was a ham radio operator. We had the equipment in the basement, the tower in the backyard, so it was kind of a natural to start first listening to him and then learning code and getting involved. So that's impressive that you were able to do that without that sort of support. Was your family supportive right away?
Supportive, but not involved. Later on, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, my sister and my mother both got licensed, but that was largely a ceremonial exercise. Neither of them are active hams. I think you could say the support might have lessened when I did things like, as like a 10 or 12-year-old drilled like a 3-inch hole in the side of the house for coaxes. It probably didn't help the relations, but no, everybody's been incredibly supportive.
Everybody gets over that eventually, right? I hope.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's jump right into contesting. And I'd like to start with the ARRL 10-meter contest, since I believe that was your most recent effort.
Yep, that probably that would be one of the more recent ones.
And I think you were part of a multi-op team with ZF1A.
Correct.
Tell me about that. Where is ZF1A located? Whose station is that? And who did you share the desk with?
Sure. So ZF1A is the call sign, Zulu Fox 1 Alpha is the call sign of the Cayman Amateur Radio Society, which you can think of as like the ARRL of the Cayman Islands. It just so happens that call sign is used only for contesting pretty much. And there's a group of 5 of us, myself and 4 of my friends, who kind of jointly maintain the ZF1A contest station for major operations. The station is hosted at the house of Andrews at F1EJ, and we bring down radios and antennas, and we've put up bigger stuff over time and grown to what is now a pretty mature, complex station.
So I presume you've operated both in person from ZF1A as well as remote.
Yeah, I think to sum up, between remote and local, I've probably done almost 40 operations from ZF1A over 10 in person.
That's incredible. So tell me about this most recent experience. I believe you are all operating remote.
Yep. The ARRL 10 would have been last weekend, I believe. Second weekend in December. For those who don't know, it's a very simple ordeal. It's a 48-hour contest. It takes place solely on the 10-meter band, and it's a mixed mode contest. You can operate Morse code and phone, CW and SSB. So when I operate contests seriously, we mostly do them in the Cayman Islands. But we had just come off of both CQ Worldwide contests, and we were thinking, we'd get on and make a couple contacts. So we kind of had a relaxed multi-single in the ARRL 10. Nothing too serious, but it was fun.
So your relaxed effort has you in third place on 3830 scores. So that's the relaxed version?
Yeah, well, there's certain things we do when we're really playing serious that, do make a difference. Like one of the techniques we do is we have multiple radios operating on the same band, what we call in-band operation. So one station can call CQ and another station can, interleave contacts. We did not do that. That adds a pretty substantial total. It can really get the QSO rate up there. It's one person. We slept up each night, didn't try and make contacts once the band closed, e-skip or anything like that. So it was fun, but I wouldn't call it, a particularly serious entry.
So out of those 40 times that you've operated from ZF1A, how many times were multi-op?
Most of them. I did CQ Worldwide sideband single op in 2020, but because there's 5 of us who kind of jointly put up a non-trivial amount of money to run the place, and we're all really good close friends. We mostly do multis.
So I know a lot of people, for example, WW4LL has pretty much a different group of operators for every contest, but you've made reference several times to what sounds like a core group of 5 hands.
Exactly.
Right? So how did you all meet to begin with?
So how did we all meet? We've all kind of known each other for a number of years through contesting, socializing a date and that sort of thing. And then one by one, we kind of all were brought down to ZF by somebody else at one point. Occasionally we have guest operators join us for contests, but it's kind of the same staple crew most of the time.
So, Marty, you're relatively young compared to a lot of ham radio operators. How did you first get on the radar for people to be inviting you down to the Cayman Islands to operate?
Well, I've been very fortunate that I've gotten to operate from some pretty large stations, both multi-op and single op. And I think ham radio is just like, anything else you do. And I'm not claiming to be particularly good or talented. But you plug away and with experience, every experience you have is an audition for the next one. And I'd say as a trick, I'm a pretty technical guy. I'm an electrical engineer. So I know a thing or 3 about audio switching and antenna switching and rotators, and I can climb towers. And those skills certainly, the laboring skills certainly make you attractive as somebody to bring along when.
So you're versatile.
I'm versatile.
So what are the other stations you operated from?
Well, I've operated from many in the U.S. Some of the larger ones that you might have heard of would be like K3LR or KC1XX, K1LZ, in Maine, or first you had a station in Massachusetts and then in Maine. I've operated in Israel at 4X6TT, in the Yukon, in Canada, VY1 AAA. I've operated a bunch of different ham radio stations.
Obviously, that's a long list.
I was going to say, ND7K in Arizona, which is N6WIN's superstation.
So how do all those experiences, and I'm talking about the stations, how do those stations compare with each other?
Every station is unique. Every station has its tricks and its secrets, and learning how to exploit those tricks is really how you make big scores, right? It's not about the hardware. It's about being at the right place at the right time and knowing when to beam which direction and what frequency band to be on. I always point to people talk about, you go to these big stations, it's very easy to make a big score. If you ever want to learn what contesting is really about, you can go online. There's plenty of places to look up contest scores. And John Doerr, K1AR, who happens to be the director of the CQ Worldwide contests, has a dipole at home, an 80-meter dipole. And he routinely goes out and makes 3,000 contacts or 4,000 contacts in a contest. So it's all about skills once your antenna is decent enough.
So tell me, if you would, what some of those secrets are. Just pick one of the superstations that you've gone to. You don't need to mention the call sign or the name. But
sure.
What are those tricks of the trade that you would use at one of those stations?
Yeah, I think contesting is just a big gathering of tricks of the trade, right? Like one thing that I always point out to maybe more inexperienced operators is, I'll tell you because I've been on the other side of big pileups. Normally, you see a station spotted on the DX cluster, reverse beacon network or something. And I'm talking about CW mainly. And you hear a pileup and there's like 30 stations calling on the same frequency. There's 0 beat. It's absolutely impossible to pull a station out when you're on the other end when half the world is calling you, as we like to say. The more experienced operators know to speed up or slow down or turn off 50 hertz off the 0 beat pileup, and they get through right away. So I think, I always say that one of the hardest skills in contesting is searching and pouncing. When's a good time to run off and work a couple multipliers? Some multipliers might be spotted on the DX cluster, but some you have to, be at the right place at the right time. Do you know all the openings, from where you're operating from? Like, I know from Massachusetts in the CQ Worldwide CW, if I'm going to work a JA on 80 meters, it's probably going to be right at our sunset, 21:15 or something. It's all about kind of all these experiences that where to look for certain openings. JA might be open on 20 meters over the pole in the morning. It's the short skip in the Caribbean, when to work the close-in stations and the higher bands. That might be challenging. All of these things just come with, practice and experience.
So I get that it does come with experience, and the longer you're on the bands, this all comes to you. But you add an entirely different level of engagement when you get on a plane and travel to Israel or go out west. How do you yourself gain that experience so that you understand quickly what you're dealing with, say in Arizona or in Israel?
One of the things I do before any contest that I'm going to operate is I look at a lot of logs. You can learn a lot from logs of other stations who've operated in that contest. So I'll look at logs for stations that were, nearby. For ND7K, there's plenty of stations in Arizona you can look at to get familiar with the openings, when to be where, when to zig, when to zag. Logs are hugely helpful, and I always spend a lot of time looking at those. Also, for contests, before the contest, leading up to the contest, if I'm in the area where the station is, I like to be on the air every day just to get a feel for things, even if it's only for 10 minutes and I call CQ and see when, what time does 10 meters open in the morning? Things like that. People say that the biggest mistake that new contesters normally make is time management. If I only have so many hours to be on, when can I be on? Or how do I optimize my time? Or am I in the wrong place at the wrong time? It's always, if you know the little tricks and you have the experience, it's easier. The more you know, it's easy. It becomes easier to do well. There's things like, for example, call signs. If you do this a lot and you know the big stations, and you hear a suffix, the suffix of a call sign. The example I always give, he's, now a silent key, but there's only one loud, he's, not anymore, but there was only one loud Bravo Lima Echo on the air in Europe. And if you ever heard, Bravo Lima Echo, you knew it was GW4BLE. And it's things like that. If you hear the BLE and the pileup, it's GW4BLE. The same goes for like on CW, weird call signs, like a couple years ago, Echo 5 Echo was on, which on code is just terrible. And if you're aware of the de-expeditions that are on, because, there's websites where you can go on and look, building that whole, what I call the contesting situational awareness, helps hugely. What de-expeditions are going to be on? When am I going to make contacts with those? What you see a lot of in newer contesters, especially in DX contests, is they'll make contacts, but they won't work any multipliers, or they'll work multipliers but not make any contacts, and you have to do both. And that's kind of an art and a skill.
Well, I can speak to the time management issue. As you may know, I'm recently back into ham radio, and I'm recently back into contesting, and I did operate the ARRL 10, and I did okay, but it certainly wasn't anywhere near award winning. And when I look back at it, and I've talked to others, it had a lot to do with being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or running too long, searching too long, even taking 3 or 4 minutes. These mini breaks. I was still at the radio, but I just kind of lost focus, and it all adds up. 36 hours later, you realize you don't have the multipliers, or don't have the scores. That
contest is particularly challenging. I'll point out one thing, which is it's a mixed mode contest. So if you're operating on CW and SSB, it's really tricky to nail when you're on SSB and when you're on CW, especially because there's a point advantage. You get 2 points for every code contact and 1 point for every phone contact. So you really have to know when the peak of the opening is to go to phone, like in the morning with Europe. So it's all experience and luck.
So tell me how the planning, the strategy shifts with a multi-op team versus single op. I mean, everything you're talking about, if you bring 5 people's experience to the table, do you find that magnifies your skill level, or are you competing a little bit with other people's opinions of where you should be?
So in the, in my team, in ZF, our group, we all know each other really well. There's no ego involved. We all know who's best at what, what skills are going to solve each problem. And it all really magnifies. I'd say that we make a schedule before the contest that, kind of optimizes who's best at what, Some people are really good at staying up all night and working low band multipliers. Some people can run really, really fast on phone, for example, but might need some sleep. Some people might just be mutants and can do it all. Making a good operating schedule is very important, and sticking to it, at least for the first half of the contest.
And Marty, what's your particular skill, or are you considered a mutant?
I'm not a mutant. I'm pretty good at fixing things. I've had a lot of time to practice on the in-band radio on CW and on phone, but especially on CW, I really enjoy doing the second radio, the in-band radio. And on phone, I enjoy running very fast, high rate on phone.
If you could operate only one contest during the year, which one would it be?
CQ Worldwide CW. That's the big one.
And tell me why.
I prefer CW. Phone is fun, but it's fatiguing. And the CQ Worldwide contest is just the biggest contest of the year, the most activity, the most challenging. The CQ contests are I think where it's at as far as skill level. In sheer just enjoyment, the ARRL contests from the Caribbean can bring huge QSO rates, 400 an hour or more. And that's also exceptionally fun in its own right. It's a different set of skills.
So if you were sitting down with somebody like myself, but not necessarily me, who's just getting a start in contesting, what would you tell that person?
As to advice about contesting? I would probably tell them to, most contesters most people who are getting into contesting, there's normally a few very easy ways to improve their scores. The first one is the chair. You have to sit in it. Most people don't operate that many hours, and operating more hours drives the score up. It's pretty simple math. The other piece of advice I always tell people is act loud. If you think your station is loud and you act like you're loud, you're going to break through more pileups. You'll spend more time calling CQ. Most little guys don't spend enough time calling CQ, and it hurts because you can only search and pounce with a little signal so fast. And I tell people, say you're on 10 meters, go way up in the band. For all I care, go to 2900 and call CQ, where you're all by yourself and you're not fighting for the band edge, and people will call you and you'll make contacts. But the most important thing I always tell people is do what's fun for you. There's no cash prizes. There's no elite receptions. So do what's fun, and if it's not fun, turn the radio off.
Give me some advice on running versus S&P.
Sure.
How long do you run a frequency? When do you know? It's not necessarily a time, but when do you know personally when it's time to leave that frequency and move on?
Generally, when I go into a contest, I think about how long I want to stay on a band before I kind of QSY up and down to a different frequency band. So in the morning, for example, say the sun, sun's 20 meters might open at 10:30 Zulu or something. So I'll probably, maybe at 10:15, I'll start calling CQ. And I'll get a little bit of a run going or something. And then normally if I'm single op, I'll be doing SO2R, single op 2 radios. And I'll be listening on 15 meters. And as soon as 15 meters gets, what I call lively, feeling good, I normally will take some time and search and pounce on the band and call, the louder stations. And if the louder stations come back to me on the first call, they're really easy to work. That's normally a good indication that the band's kind of ready, and you can go QSY up the band. Same thing in the afternoons, QSYing down. But generally, I try and be on the highest band that's open, that's producing decent rate.
And you stay there.
And I stay there, and I keep calling CQ because no matter what, if you have a decently loud station, the most effective way you can make contacts is by calling CQ.
And tell me about your strategy for multipliers.
Work them early and often. One thing about multipliers is there's no such thing as catching up on multipliers. So I like to hit multipliers hard out of the gate and all contests long, because if you get to Sunday morning and you realize you haven't worked any multipliers, it's pretty hard to catch up.
So will you be on a run frequency and leave that frequency briefly to pick up a multiplier?
Normally not. Normally I'll have the second radio. If I'm single op, 2 radios, or if we're multi-op, I'll normally have an in-band radio calling multipliers. But you have to think about where you are in the world and if multipliers are going to call you or not. When I'm operating in the Cayman Islands and I'm the only station on in the Cayman Islands, I don't tune around much because everybody needs to call me. When I'm operating in New England, not so much. There's some things that you can do to make sure that you're the guy people call. If I'm operating at a large station as a single op, and I know there's not a lot of multi-ops on, I'll try and be the first person on that band. Because, it attracts some of the people who need to work the multiplier. But, when you're doing SO2R and you're not a unique station, you just have to tune the heck out of that second radio. That's the secret.
So speaking of radios, a lot of us don't have the opportunity to use multiple stations. Whether you're an ICOM or a Kenwood guy at home, that's what you have, and you either love it or hate it. Probably, well, I'm going to assume you love it if you still have it. But in your case, tell me what's your preferred equipment that you've used?
I'm an ICOM guy. I've used ICOM radios for a long time, but the big secret is most any radio that you're going to see these days is good enough. When we look at the dynamic range, received dynamic range of most of these radios, the close spaced dynamic range, most radios these days are nominally 100 dB radios, and that's fine. I think any modern radio is normally good enough for contesting, as long as it's kind of above that good enough threshold. I use ICOM 7610s. I think they're a good value and work well. I've used all sorts of radios, and they all seem to work just fine. Generally, I tell people these days, find a radio that you like the ergonomics of, that's easy for you to use, and the receiver performance is probably good enough. And if it's not good enough, you will, and it's because you're operating at a very high level, and you know that already. But the radio that you can use most effectively, or the radio that you have on the desk, is the radio I would use. I recently participated in a very serious contest effort that set a record using ICOM IC 7081s, which came out in the late 80s or the early 90s. So, yeah, I don't lose too much sleep about radios.
So I was surprised to read that you don't actually have a home station yourself.
Nope.
You operate other people's stations, and at the same time you have this vast amount of experience. How do you do that?
Well, I did have a home station for a long time, but it came to the point where I was not operating it very much, and it was a pain to maintain. And I've always found that having good friendships with people who have larger stations, and I try and offer, a little bit of, I'm going to help you with maybe a new antenna, or climb the towers, or fix things up. And, multi-operator station owners are normally always looking for people to operate their stations. And it's all about interpersonal friendships and relationships. And
what's the next contest you have on your drawing board?
The next contest on my calendar would probably be the NAQP, the North American QSO Party. In January, the phone and the code. I'll do the code contest from the Cayman Islands again. That'll be a blast. I really enjoy
single
that
up.
Probably single up that for that one. Yeah, maybe multi two. We'll see.
So, do you have all your tickets bought in advance for the Cayman Islands? It sounds like you spent a lot of time there.
Sometimes I wing it a week and a half beforehand. Fly on points, that sort of thing.
Any last thoughts for us?
It was great to be here. It's I think your shows are fantastic, and if you haven't gotten on in a radio contest, give it a try. It's real fun. And if anything I said today offended you, or you have a question about what I said, or you thought I'm an idiot, just send me an email at n1c@n1c.org. I'm always happy to talk.
Hey, Marty, I really appreciate this conversation, and hopefully
great
we'll get
to
to meet
talk.
in person at some point.